Hello, how are you all doing today? Right, today what we're going to do is we're going to create an API and we're going to create some CRUD endpoints. If you're not too sure what CRUD is, it's create, read, update and delete. So without further ado, let's get on. What we're going to do first is we're going to create a new ASP.NET Core API Visual Studio project. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to create an ASP.NET Core web application. We're going to call it round the code CRUD API. That's good. And we're going to name the solution. No, in fact, the solution is going to be CRUD API. The project name we're going to name slightly. We're going to call that web. So the web will represent the API. We're going to create some other class libraries as well, so we don't want to get too confused. So let's go ahead and create that. So we need to select API, press create, and then that will go ahead and create our API for us in Visual Studio. And then after that, we're going to create some other projects, some other libraries that we need to create. So here we go. Right, so we've got our web API. First things we need to do is we need to delete some of these default templates, these default files that come with these templates in Visual Studio. So let's delete the weather forecast. We're not going to need that. So that has been deleted. And now we've got the weather forecast controller as well. We're going to remove that. Okay, so sorted out our API, not too much there. We're next going to create our data class library. So we're going to right click there, we're going to go to add, and we're going to go to a new project, and we're going to create a class library. So we're going to create a new folder in here called data, and we're going to stick our new class library in here. We're going to call it round the code .CRUD API .data. Okay, so again, we don't need class one. We're going to remove that. What we're going to do first is we're going to create an interface of iBase. Now, how this is going to work is we're basically going to set up a base class which will have all our base properties. So any entity that has the same properties in it, like the ID, created, updated, deleted, they will basically inherit off this base class, which will inherit off an iBase interface. So we're going to set up the iBase interface first. So create a new item, call it iBase, and click add. So we're going to make it public. And so as I explained just now, we need the ID created, last updated, and deleted in there. So we're going to start off with an ID. So ID will be sort of a unique reference for the record. Now we're going to use date time offset. If you're not too sure what the difference is between date time and date time offset, basically offset gives you the offset from UTC. Quite important if you're sort of dealing with international trade and all that sort of stuff. So we've got the created, and now we're going to do two more. We're going to have a last updated, which will make nullable, and we're going to have a deleted. So what will happen is that we'll do a soft delete, and when there is a soft delete, it will basically set a time for when it was deleted. So the actual record will still be there, but when we perform our read methods, we'll basically put a filter in to say don't return it if deleted has been set. Okay, so we've done the iBase there. Next, what we need to do is we need to create a base class, which will obviously inherit the iBase, and we need to basically mirror the properties for it. So let's go ahead and do that. We also need to make this abstract as well, because none of the entities are actually going to be initialized directly through this base class. They're going to inherit it, but they're going to have their own class as such, and then we can append properties specific to that entity. So we're just going to copy these and make them all public. And last thing we need to do is we need to make sure that it actually inherits the iBase as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to integrate Entity Framework into our data assembly, into our CRUD API.data. So to do that in ASP.NET Core or .NET Core in general, we need to install a couple of NuGet packages. So we've got the Package Manager console open here, so we can do it from there. If you haven't got that open and you're not too sure where to find it in Visual Studio, I believe, yeah, you go into Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Package Manager console. We don't need to do that though because we've already got it open. So first of all, we need to make sure that we're setting it to the data project. After that, we can then go ahead. We've got our install package command that we can use. And so this goes off to NuGet. So NuGet will basically find that project and then install it like so. So the first one was Entity Framework Core. We also need SQL Server because we're going to be using a SQL Server database. So we need to integrate that in as well. We also need tools. And finally, we also need to have the Microsoft extensions configuration.json. Now the reason for that is basically, well, I'll show you in a minute when we create our DbContext, but basically we need to put in the app settings for a parameterless constructor. So I'll show you that in a bit. Okay, so we've got all them installed. Next, we're going to create our DbContext. So we are going to create a new class and we're going to call it CRUD API DbContext. There we go. So I've already created the code for this, so you don't need to watch me type it all out. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create the constructors in here. So first of all, we need to make it public. And we need to make sure that it inherits the DbContext from the Microsoft.Entity Framework Core assembly. So we need to import the assembly in. Let's create these constructors now. Let's just fix these assembly issues that we need to import. So just a few more. We've got a couple up here as well. And hopefully this is the last one. Okay, so we also need to pass in the configuration as well. Okay, so the reason why we've got two constructors here, we've got a parameterless one up here. So this is more use for testing, and also if you're into LinkPad as well, basically these things not necessarily going to be using dependency injection. So basically we're not going to have an instance of iConfiguration which gets set in dependency injection. So what this is going to do is it's basically going to create a new instance of our configuration, and it's basically going to look for the app settings.json file, and then it will basically build up a configuration based on that file. The other option is if you're already using dependency injection like you probably would do with an ASP.NET Core project, it will basically pass in the configuration that we've already set up and just basically set the protected read-only variable to that instance. Okay, so we need to override a couple of things in Entity Framework, but first we just need to get a list of assemblies. Now what we're going to be doing is we're basically going to cheat a little bit. We're going to use reflection to automatically create our models into Entity Framework. So every time we set up a new one, we don't have to keep on doing it. It'll be set up automatically. So we're going to have a list of assemblies, and for this, we're going to look at round the code CRUD API.data, which is the class library that we're in at the moment anyways. So next thing we need to do is we need to override the on model creating. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is basically what I was just talking to you now. We just need to fix that issue. import system link. There might be a few more as we go down, but basically it's going to look through all these assemblies and it's going to get all the types where the interface is of IBase, where it's a class and it's not abstract. So remember we created the base which inherits IBase, but that's abstract, so it wouldn't get picked up on this, which is what we want, because base is not going to be an entity on its own. We're going to create an entity that will inherit the base. So it will go through here, it will have a look, it will have a look for an on-model creating method, and if that exists it will invoke it. I'll show you that in a bit. And then it will also look for a base type. So on the base class, if we have an on-model creating, which we're going to have to do, and the reason why we're going to have to do it is because we need to tell entity framework which property is the primary key, which is going to be ID. So it will go through that and it will basically look for an on-model creating method that's static, and if so, it will basically invoke it. Okay, so we've done that. So we're going to be using SQL Server, but we need to tell the application where the connection string is. So what we can do with that, and let me just check that yes, so let me just check I'm putting it in the right place. Don't want to put it outside the class. That wouldn't be very good, would it? So we're basically going to set up a CRUD API DbContext connection string. And we're basically, remember we had to install SQL Server as part of one of the new Get Package Manager console packages. This is where this uses SQL Server, it's where it's coming from. So this basically tells us to use SQL Server with this connection string. Okay, so last thing we're going to do is we're going to override the on-save changes. So if I just correct these issues here, import these assemblies. Okay, so what this basically is doing is, we've got a created and last updated. Every time we create an entity or a record in an entity, we don't particularly want to have to set it explicitly every time. We don't want to set the date. So what we can do with this is we can do a sort of a loop through each entity, and if the property is created, we can set the time to now, and subsequently with the modify we can do exactly the same, update it, the last updated to the time that it is now. Okay, so we've got a DbContext set up. So we need to now set up the on-model creating. So obviously when we were using reflection, we saw that we were invoking this on-model creating, but we haven't actually created it yet. So we need to do that now. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a new static method. It's not going to be returning anything. Now we need to pass in tEntity. tEntity is basically going to be our generic method. It's going to be our entity which is passed in as a generic method. So we need to pass in a parameter of model builder, like so. And then what we need to do after that is set up the entity, and then we use this has key, which is probably going to throw an error because we probably need to import the necessary tools for entity framework. So let's go ahead and do that if we can. So why are we getting issues here? Don't know. Let's go ahead and do this anyways. Oh, I know exactly why. And I will show you in a minute. So we basically need to tell what tEntity is. So if you've not used generics before, this is basically where we give the code, a bit of understanding as to what tEntity is. It's not just anything. tEntity is going to be a class which inherits IBase, like so. So there you go. It's fixed up that issue now because it knows it's a class and it inherits IBase. So now it knows that because it's IBase, it's going to have a look at this, and it knows that these properties are in there, so we can set the ID as the primary key. Okay, so we've done all that. Now we're going to actually create our entity. So we're going to do a sort of, I don't know, a league thing. We're going to create a new team entity. So let's go ahead and do that. So we need to make it public. We also need to make sure that it inherits base. So base will give us our ID, created, last updated, and deleted. So we need to set it a table name. So this is an attribute that's imported through Microsoft Entity Framework Core. We're going to give it a name of team, and then schema, we're going to call it LGE, stands for league. Okay, so we're going to include a couple of properties here. We're going to have the name of the team. We're going to have the shirt color as well. And finally, we're going to do the location, so where they're located. Now we're also going to create our own on-model creating static method for this entity. And what we're going to be using with this is we're basically going to dictate what length these properties, how many characters they can have in them. So if we create that, okay, so we've got that. So first things first, we need to pass in the actual entity, and then we store, then we get the property. So the property, we're going to start off with property name, and we'll give that a maximum length of 200 characters, slightly over the top I think, but you'll sort of see where I'm going with this. So we've got the first one, 200 characters, and then we're going to look at shirt color. Again, we're going to give it maximum 30 characters. And lastly, we're going to go for location, and we're going to give it a maximum length of 100. So going back to our on-model creating method, this is basically, it loops through each class. So team would be part of one of these classes because it inherits the base, it's public, and it's not abstract. So it will go through here, it will use reflection to see if there's an on-model creating method and it's static. And if it is, it will invoke it, passing in the builder. After that, it will then see if there's a base type. So obviously it inherits base, so that's where it's basically looking for. So it will make sure that there is a base type, and the base type is of type base, and if it is, it will basically invoke the on-model creating method in our base class. So that would be on-model creating, passing in team as the generic method, which would be tEntity. And then after that, it's all done, it invokes it, and then it's all set up to go in Entity Framework. Now, if you've not used reflection before, just be very careful with it, because it won't pick up any issues when you're compiling. All the issues are going to be happening when you actually run, so runtime. So you're going to get a lot of runtime errors if it's not set up correctly. So be very careful with that. I certainly recommend sort of test-driven development if you're basically going to be using reflection of any sort. Okay, so we've done that. What we need to do now is we set up our entity framework. We set up an entity of team. We now need to import it into our SQL Server database. So what we need to do is we need to go back to our API, and we need to create a reference. And we basically need to import the CRUD API.data assembly into that project, like so. Next, what we need to do is we need to update our app settings. So if you remember, we set up a connection string location in our DbContext. We now need to go ahead and set this. So we create a new key of connection strings, and then we're going to set up CRUD API DbContext. So that's all good. So if you remember, it's basically this here. So it's the on configuring. We're overriding it. We're telling it to use SQL Server with that connection string. That's where the two sort of match up. So server's going to be localhost. Database is going to be CRUD API. We're going to call it CRUD API. It doesn't actually exist at the moment, but when we run our migrations, it will create it automatically. So I'm going to have a trusted connection of true. Helps if I can type properly. And multiple active results set. No, results sets equals true. And we're going to be using integrated security as well. So we're not going to need a username or password to connect to our SQL Server database. There we go. That's that set up. Now we need to import a new package into our API. So we need to import the Microsoft Entity Framework core design, and this will basically allow us to run migrations on the API. So we'll go ahead and install that. Just make sure that the project's set up to .web, and we are going to install that. So, no, not that one. It's Microsoft Entity Framework core.design. Good. So we've got that. What we need to do next is we've imported the data assembly into our API, but we also need to configure the DbContext so it knows which DbContext to use. So we can go ahead into our startup file, and we've got our configure services method here. We can go ahead and do that. So we're going to have add DbContext, and we're going to import the CRUD API DbContext as a generic, like so. Okay, so we now need, well, basically we're ready now to run our migration. So we'll go back into our package manager console. We need to set this to .data, and what we can do now is we first of all need to add a migration. It will then create our migration. So what this is going to do is it's going to set up our properties for our teams, which can then be updated to our database and reflected in a table and in columns. So we create an add migration. We're calling it init. You can call it any name you want. Let's go ahead and create that. Okay, so it's managed to successfully build. Here we go. So this is our migration script here. It's ensuring there's a schema of LGE, and then this is basically our table. So it's got our ID, created, last updated and deleted from our base class. And then specifically for the team, it's got the name, shirt color and location. It's also saying that the ID is the primary key, and it's basically given it a name as well of PK_team. Okay, so we can now go ahead and update our database. So what this is going to do is it's going to create our database, and it's also going to create our team table inside of it. And it's going to completely mirror what's in the team entity. The properties in the team entity is going to mirror the columns for the team table. Okay, so just to prove that has actually happened, let's refresh our database. You can see we've got our CRUD API database there. Go into tables and we should see a league.team, which we do. Let's open that up. There we go. So we've got our columns in there. Obviously no records at the moment. We're going to use Postman in a sec to basically create, well, we're going to create our API endpoints first, then we're going to use Postman to actually test it. Okay, so we've got that part done. Now we're going to basically create a new class library, and we're going to integrate our services in there. So let's go ahead and do that. So we add a new project. So yeah, we need to select class library. We're going to create a new folder for it, and we're going to stick it in a services folder. And we're going to call it round the code .CRUD API .services. Let's go ahead and create that. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is obviously remove the class 1. We don't need that. And we're going to add a reference to data. So go on to project reference, select data, and press OK. So now we've got the reference set up with the data. That basically means we're going to be able to get our entities through to our services. Because what we're going to do with the services, we're going to build up the actual functionality for our create, read, update, and delete. So what we're going to do with that is we're going to create a service. Now this is a base service, so it's going to work in a similar way to our base entity, where it's going to have all the generic methods, and then we're going to create a separate service for each of our entities. Now the point of that is that at least if you want to add new sort of methods, then you can basically override stuff, or you can create new ones specifically to that entity. So let's go ahead and create our iBase first. We're going to create a new interface. So there it is. I'm going to call it iBase service. So rather than typing all this out, I've already got it ready. So we can go in here. So we just import in the relevant assemblies that we need for this. So we're going to have a create, read, update, and deleted. So let's go ahead and create the base service now. Okay, so once again, we've already got that created, so we don't need to type it all out. It's a bit too much going on, so I don't think you really want to watch me type it all out. Okay, so let's get all our assemblies in here. Like so, one more there. Also need to import entity framework core. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we can talk through the code. So we've got our constructor here, passes in an instance of our DbContext, and then we've got to create async method. That's just basically adds the record, saves the changes. We've got a read as well, an option of no tracking on there as well. Basically, when we update, we're going to do a partial update, which basically means we don't want to track the changes at the point when we're actually getting the initial record. We want to do that sort of later on. We've got our update as well, so that what this will do is it will pass in an ID and an entity. So it will basically only update the records that have actually been updated, and we're going down here and we're specifying, we're getting the current record, and we're basically setting the values for the update entity. So just need to fix that issue there. So, and lastly, so that's our update there. So we'll set the values and set the state to modified. And if anything's been modified, then it will save the changes, update the record. And lastly, we've got a delete. And this, as I was explaining earlier, we've got a delete property. So all this is going to do is basically select the deleted timestamp and then basically save the changes. So it's still going to be modified. We're not going to be using deleted because we're not doing a hard delete. The actual record's still going to be physically there in the database. Okay, so we've sorted that out. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a service specifically for our team entity. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to create the interface first. So we're going to create iTeam service. So we're going to make it a public interface, and we're going to inherit the iBase service, and we're going to be passing in the team as a generic. So we just need to import that in. If we can, it's going to let me. There we go. So if we go back to iBase service, it's basically T entity is going to be team in this instance. So that will basically mean that we've got our create, read, update, and deleted for our team. So we don't need to do any further work with that. Next, what we need to do is we need to create a team service. So let's go ahead and do that. So again, we need to make it public, and we need to inherit a couple of things. We need to inherit the base service of team, and we need to also inherit the iTeam service, like so. Now you can see it's throwing an error here, and the reason being is that in base service, there isn't a constructor that isn't parameterless. We need to pass in our DbContext for that. So let's go ahead and do that. So all we need to do with that is we need to create a constructor, pass in the DbContext, like so, and then we then just call the base constructor. So we just need to pass in that parameter like so, and there you go. That's that all fixed for us. Okay, so that's literally it. We don't need to do anything else with the team service. If we were sort of going to add new methods in there, like we're going to update multiple records, then we could add it into the team service if it was specific to the team service, but obviously we don't need to do that for this demo. So let's go back into our API project. Let's go into startup. We basically need to add the team service into dependency injection, and we're going to use that in our controller, which we're going to create in a minute, and then we can use that to sort of call our methods that we've set up. So we're going to add a scope, and it's going to be of iTeam service, and the actual service, the actual class is going to be team service, like so. So we need to add a reference to run the code CRUD API.services in our API in order for that to work. Good. So we need to install a couple of additional NuGet packages. Now, if you watched or saw my article based on partial updates for HTTP patch, this is basically what we're going to be doing here. I'm not going to talk through why we do partial updates because I've done a blog article and a video a couple of weeks ago on it. If you want to have a look at it, go on to runthecode.com, and I suggest in the search, just search for HTTP patch, and that will probably give you the article that you need. But let's go ahead and install the relevant NuGet package manager consoles that we need for that to work. So first thing we need to do is we need to install the Microsoft ASP.NET Core JSON patch, and we need to set the default project to web because we need it on the API. Okay. And we also need to install the Newtonsoft JSON project as well. Next, we need to just go ahead and add that into our controllers, otherwise we won't be able to do a partial update. So say all this stuff is on that article, the HTTP patch article, and there's also a video on it as well if you're watching on YouTube. You just need to go to my channel, roundthecode.com/YouTube. There's a video on HTTP patch there. Okay, so we now need to create a controller, and we're going to set up a base controller. So in line with our entities and our services, we're going to do the same with our controllers. So I'm going to set up base controller like so, and we have got the code for that already, so you don't need to watch me code it all in. Okay, so let's just import our assemblies. Are nearly there. We need to sort out that one as well. Another one there to sort out. Okay, so this is we're basically using the API controller, so our returns will basically output a JSON. Now we're making it abstract again because we're not going to be calling this base controller directly. In the same pattern that we did with the services and the entity for our team, we're going to create a separate team controller and inherit of this controller. So we've got a protected constructor, and that's going to pass in a service, an IBase service of T entity. So in our instance, it's going to be iTeam service when we create the team controller. And then we've got our create, and it's basically going to look at that service and use the create async method. So it's exactly the same for the read, update partial, slightly different. As I say, we need the JSON patch document. We're going to do a partial update. As I say, I'm not going to talk through that with you as to why we're doing that. Just take my word for it. And then we've got the delete as well. So we've got our base controller set up. Next, what we need to do is we need to create our team controller. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create a new controller there. New empty controller. Going to call it team controller. Okay, so a couple of things we need to change. First of all, we need to tell our API where to route the controller to. So we can just use this route attribute, which is part of the MVC API library. And we're going to give it an endpoint of API team /team. We've got team controller, and we need to inherit the base controller of team. So that will give us our create, updated, read, and delete methods. So we're getting an error there, and it's the same issue that we had with the service. We need to basically pass in our service because we haven't got a parameterless constructor. So we can go ahead and do that. So we're going to pass in our team service, and we're just going to call the base class constructor and pass in the team service like so. And all being well, that should work. We just need to copy that, import that. There we go. Yep, so I haven't got any errors for that, which is good. So now it's time to basically run our API and test in Postman. Just going to make a slight change to the launch settings. We're going to run it on port 2001, so I'm just going to override that quickly. So make that a bit simpler. So we run it in development mode on localhost 2001. Okay, so we can go ahead now and test our methods. Hopefully it will run first, because we haven't at this point actually tested to see if it runs or not. But we're gonna find out in a minute if it does or not. Okay, so that looks like it's all running. So let's go ahead and use Postman to test it out. So first thing we're going to do, we need to create an entity. There's no point trying to read one because we haven't got one at the moment. So we're going to create a new team. The name's going to be London under 21s. Shirt color is going to be red, and the location's in London. So let's run that, see if it works. Yep, so we're getting a 200 response. What I've done is I've basically returned in the entity as a response. So I can show you that in the base controller. Excuse me. So yeah, we've got the entity there. It's passing it back from this create async, and then it's returning it as a response. So we can go ahead and read that now with our get method. There you go. You see, it's got all the properties set in there. Next, we're going to update. Now we're going to do a partial update. We're going to change the shirt color to yellow, but we're not going to change anything else. So we'll go ahead and do that. So yeah, once again, we're getting a 200 response. You can see the name and the location stayed exactly the same, and the shirt color has been changed to yellow. You also notice as well, we've got the last updated that's been set with the current time, so the timestamp's been set for us. Lastly, we just need to delete it and just make sure that works. So if we go ahead and do that, as you can see, it's passing back the entity and it's set the flag to deleted. Now, because it's deleted, we shouldn't be able to run this again. So hopefully if we run it again, it should throw a 404 response. So let's have a look at that. Yep, as you can see, we've got 404 up there, and the JSON response that we're getting from the API is saying that it's 404 as well. And it should be the same now for the team. So if we do another call to it, yeah, it's returning not found, 404 not found. Okay, so we've set up a team. That's pretty straightforward. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a lead just to show you how simple it is following this sort of layout. You know, sort of following this architecture. So we need to stop our API. So we'll let that stop. So we're going to create a new class, new entity, and we're going to call it League. So what we basically need to do is we need to first of all inherit the base class. And we're going to give it a table name. We're going to call it League. And we're going to give it a schema name as well. I'm going to call it LGE, same as team. So inside of that, we're just going to give it a name for now, I think, like so. And if we go back into our team entity, we just copy that in. So we can get rid of these two. So we need to import the model builder assembly, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. We need to change that to League, and we're just going to give it a maximum length of 100 characters for this. Okay, so that's done. Don't need to do anything else with that. It's already been added into our entity frame. Our model's already been entered into our DbContext. So through reflection, if you remember. So we now need to create a separate service for it. So we're going to create the interface first. I'm going to call it iLeague service. So we need to inherit the iBase service into it. Okay, so that's all we need to do with that. Next, we need to create a new service. We're going to create the actual class this time. Call it League service. Make it public. And if I refer to the team service, just make sure that I'm copying, I'm importing all the correct classes and interfaces. So we've got base service. We're going to pass League in as our generic. So just need to import the assembly. It needs to be of iLeague service. And obviously we're getting squiggly lines, and the reason being is that we need a constructor with a parameter passed in. Okay, so we can use that one. That's actually the controller. I need the team service one. That's the one I need. Pass that in, League service. Good. So, created our service, created our data. Last thing we need to do is create the controller for it. So let's go ahead and do that. An empty MVC controller. I'm going to call it League controller. And yep, once again, we're just going to basically mimic what's in the team controller. So we'll do a bit of a copy and paste and then change the relevant, change it in the relevant places for League. So update the API route. Set League controller. Pass in League into the base controller. And we need to import the assembly. Then we need to change the constructor name. And then we need to pass in the iLeague service. Like so. Just rename it from team service to League service. Okay, so nearly done there. We just need to add it into our dependency injection as well. So go ahead and do that. So iLeague service, and the class name is League service. Okay, so all being well, that will run for us now. We'll soon find out. Let's thinking about it. Yep, so we've got that running now. So we can go ahead now and create a league for ourselves. So change the endpoint to League, and we're just going to call the league London Under 21s League. There we go. and hopefully this will return a positive response. Are we? No, it's just, we've got a breakpoint on there. I thought it'd thrown an error then for one moment. And oh no, it has thrown it. We didn't run our migrations, did we? No. Need to run the migrations because we haven't got the table in our SQL Server. So that's the one thing we missed out there. So we can just go ahead, add migration, and call it any name you want, but we're going to call it League. So that's going to add our migration. It's going to set up our migration. If it's going to work, we need to set that to data. Try again. Here we go. So this is our league table now. So it's got our base properties in there and it's got the name as well. Go ahead and update the database. Cool, so that's all sorted out. And then now we can rerun our API and hopefully our endpoint testing will work this time. So that's now running for us. There we go. So that's how easy it is. If you get the infrastructure is quite important with an API, but if you're sort of copying the same methods, then it's good to have a good infrastructure up to save you time over the long haul. So that's all I have for you today. If you've got any questions, leave comments or go to roundthecode.com and click on the contact form, fill out your name, your email address, any comments that you have, and I'll respond to you as soon as possible. And if you want to read more .NET articles, visit roundthecode.com, subscribe to my YouTube channel, roundthecode.com/YouTube, and follow me on Twitter, it's @roundthecode. And thanks very much for joining, and I will see you soon. Take care, goodbye.